Imagine just for a second, you're looking at a resume.
Okay.
And it reads something like this. CEO of a massive multinational conglomerate by age 20.
A pretty good start.
Yeah. Then, by 25, he's merged with the biggest competitor on the global market. By 28, he's expanding into these hostile, completely untapped markets.
It sounds like the ultimate Silicon Valley burnout story, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The kind of thing you read about and just shake your head.
It really does, but we have to scale that up. We are not talking about tech stocks or IPOs.
No.
We're talking about the known world. We're talking about a single person who, in a little over a decade, just redrew the map of the planet from, Greece down through Egypt, across Persia, all the way to India.
The scale of that achievement it's almost difficult to really comprehend in modern terms. We're talking about Alexander III of Macedon.
Alexander the Great. It's a name that's so heavy with history, it almost feels like a myth. But today, we're going to try and strip away some of that marble and legend.
Which is a tall order. A very tall order.
It is. But to help us do that, we've really combed through a serious stack of sources. Yeah. We're looking at the classic historical biographies, right? Arrian and Plutarch.
Guys who were writing centuries later. But crucially, they had access to eyewitness accounts that are now lost to us.
Exactly. And we're pairing that with modern analysis. We've got military breakdowns from History Hit, some fascinating medical theories from Smithsonian Magazine, and, detailed records of his battles and geography.
And what's really important to note about these sources is that they don't always agree. Not at all. Alexander is like a Rorschach test. To some, he's this divine hero. To others, he's a genocidal tyrant.
So our mission today isn't just to list dates.
Right.
We want to understand the trajectory, the physics of this life. How does a student of Aristotle become a self-proclaimed god? How does a Macedonian king break the Persian superpower?
And finally, we have to look at the very strange and really tragic circumstances of his death.
It's a tragedy in 3 acts. High energy, high stakes, and so much drama. So let's not waste any more time in the preamble. Let's get into Act 1. The foundation.
Right.
Because you don't just wake up one day and decide to conquer the world. You have to be built for it.
And Alexander was, in a way, built in a laboratory. He was born in July 356 BC in Pella, the capital of Macedonia. But to understand the son, you absolutely have to look at the parents. And this was, well, let's just call it a volatile environment.
Dysfunctional feels like a very polite way to put it. You have Philip II, his father, and Olympias, his mother. Talk about a clash of titans.
Think of them as oil and water, but both are highly combustible. Philip II was a genius in his own right. He's often overshadowed by his son, but you have to give the man his due.
Oh, for sure.
Philip is the one who took Macedonia, which, the southern Greeks, the sophisticated Athenians and Spartans, they saw them as a bunch of hillbilly goat herders.
Right, barbarians from the north.
Exactly. And he turned them into the Prussia of the ancient world.
He built the machine that Alexander would eventually get to drive.
Precisely. Philip completely revolutionized warfare. He introduced the sarissa.
Okay, let's pause on that for a second. The sarissa, this isn't just a spear, is it? Because when I think spear, I think of something you can, throw. A javelin.
No, you are definitely not throwing this. A standard Greek hoplite spear was maybe, 7 or 8 feet long? You fight in a tight line, shield to shield?
Right. Manageable.
The sarissa was an 18-foot-long pike.
18 feet.
18 feet. Made of heavy cornel wood. It required 2 hands and had a big counterweight on the back just to balance it.
So when the Macedonian Phalanx, their big infantry block, lowers these things, the enemy is facing, 5 rows of spear points before they can even get close to the first guy?
Exactly. It's a porcupine. It's a mobile fortress of sharpened steel. And Philip drilled these men relentlessly until they could move this massive, unwieldy formation with the precision of a ballet dancer. That's the inheritance Alexander gets from his father, the most professional killing machine the world had ever seen.
And he also learned logistics, pragmatism.
Yeah, how to drink like a Macedonian, which is to say, very, very heavily.
And then on the other side, you have the mother, Olympias.
Olympias is just a fascinating character. She was from Epirus, slightly wilder country to the west of Macedon, and she was intense.
That's one word for it.
She was a devout follower of the mystery cults, especially the worship of Dionysus.
The god of wine and ecstasy.
Yes, but her version of worship apparently involved snake handling. The sources, like Plutarch, tell us she used to sleep with snakes in her bed.
Which I'm sure did wonders for her marriage with Philip.
I can't imagine it helped the intimacy, no. But her influence on Alexander was deeply spiritual. She was absolutely convinced that Philip was not the only father in the picture. She told Alexander from a very young age that he had divine ancestry. She whispered in his ear that he was actually the son of Zeus.
Wow. So you have a father who is the ultimate military pragmatist, showing you how to drill troops and manage supply lines. And then you have a mother whispering in your other ear, "You're a god, my son. Destiny awaits." That is a potent cocktail for a child's ego.
It created this lifelong tension in him. He desperately wanted to impress his father and surpass him, but he also believed in this mystical destiny his mother laid out for him. And this whole nature versus nurture thing really played out in his education.
Right, because Philip didn't just hire any local tutor.
Oh, no. In 343 BC, Philip basically goes out and hires the smartest man in the world.
Aristotle.
The man himself. It's hard to imagine a more high-profile homeschooling arrangement. Philip sets up this place called the School of Niesa, which was essentially a boarding school for Alexander and the sons of other Macedonian nobles, boys like Ptolemy, Hephaestion, and Cassander.
And these names are going to be very important later on, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. These are the boys who grow up to be his generals, his inner circle, his bodyguards, and eventually the men who tear his empire apart. But at Niesa, they're just students.
And Aristotle doesn't teach them Conquest 101.
No, he teaches them everything else. Philosophy, poetry, drama, science, politics, even medicine. It wasn't just about how to fight, it was about how to think. It's why later, when Alexander's marching across Asia, he's actually sending biological specimens, new plants, strange animals, back to Aristotle in Greece.
That's wild. He's in the middle of conquering the world, but he's also doing field research.
He saw the whole thing as a scientific expedition as much as a military one.
And Aristotle also gave him a book, right? A specific book that becomes this talisman for him.
He did. The Iliad. Homer's epic of the Trojan War. Aristotle prepared a special annotated copy just for him. And Alexander treasured this book. The sources tell us he slept with it under his pillow right next to a dagger.
He didn't just read it, he lived it. He breathed it.
He identified completely with Achilles. You know the story of Achilles? The great warrior hero who was given a choice. A long, peaceful, obscure life, or a short, glorious life, where his name lives forever.
And Achilles chooses glory.
Alexander made the exact same choice. He viewed his entire life through this heroic Homeric lens. He's not just fighting battles. In his mind, he's reenacting the myths.
And we see this capability, this mix of observation and sheer will very early on. There's the famous story of Bucephalus, his horse. I love this story because it feels like a Sherlock Holmes moment for a teenager.
It really does. It shows his intellect. So the story goes that a horse dealer brought this magnificent, huge black stallion to show Philip. But the beast was completely unmanageable.
Just wild.
Bucking, rearing, refusing to let anyone get near him. Philip was furious. He was about to send the dealer away, basically shouting, "Why did you bring me a mad horse?"
And Alexander, who's just a boy, steps in.
He does. He says, "I can handle him." It was a massive wager. If he failed, he would have been the laughingstock of the entire court. But Alexander had noticed something the experienced trainers had all missed. The horse wasn't mad. He was terrified.
Terrified of what?
Of his own shadow. The sun was behind the horse and was casting this big, jittery, moving shadow on the ground in front of him. Every time the horse moved, the shadow moved, and it just kept spooking him.
So simple.
So simple. Alexander calmly took the bridle, turned Bucephalus to face the sun so the shadow fell behind him, and the horse calmed down instantly. Alexander mounted him and rode off.
It's a complete triumph of brain over brawn, and Philip's reaction to this.
Philip famously wept and said, "My boy, you must find a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedonia is too small for you."
Talk about foreshadowing. But that boy king era starts very, very abruptly. Philip is assassinated in 336 BC. At a wedding feast, of all places, Alexander is only 20.
And this is an incredibly dangerous moment. In ancient royal courts, a transition of power usually meant a bloodbath. Rivals see an opportunity. But Alexander didn't hesitate for a second. He immediately moved to consolidate his power. He eliminated any potential rivals to the throne cousins, other factions, and then he had to deal with rebellions. The Greek city-states, especially Thebes and Athens, thought, okay, the scary father is dead, we can revolt against the kid.
And he showed them he wasn't weak. He marched south on Thebes.
He didn't just march on Thebes, he annihilated it. He razed the entire city to the ground, sparing only the temples and the house of the poet Pindar, and sold the entire population into slavery.
Wow.
It was a brutal but very calculated message to the rest of Greece. I may be young, but I am Philip's son. Do not test me.
Message received, loud and clear. With the home front secure, he finally turns his eyes to the prize Philip had always dreamed of, Persia.
The Achaemenid Persian Empire, the superpower of the age. It is so hard for us to conceptualize how big this thing was. It stretched from modern-day Turkey all the way to Pakistan, from Egypt up to the Caucasus. It was massive, unimaginably wealthy, and seemingly invincible.
And in 334 BC, Alexander crosses the Hellespont, that narrow strait separating Europe and Asia, with about 43,000 infantry and 5,500 cavalry. By modern standards, that's a small football stadium crowd. He's invading a superpower with that.
It was a huge logistical gamble, absolutely.
Yeah.
But he marks his arrival with this piece of theater straight out of the Iliad. As his ship approaches the Asian coast, he stands at the prow and casts a spear into the soil before he even lands.
A symbolic gesture.
More than that. He loops onto the beach and declares the entire continent spear one land.
It's a declaration of total intent. He's not there for a border skirmish or to negotiate a treaty. He's there to take it all.
Exactly. And the early part of this campaign is just a highlight reel of victories. You have the Battle of the Granicus, then the Battle of Assus in 333 BC. And Assus is crucial because it's the first time Alexander faces King Darius III directly.
The great king of Persia himself.
The king of kings. Yeah. Darius brings a massive army, but the narrow terrain at Assus actually neutralizes his numerical advantage. And Alexander does what Alexander does. He charges directly at Darius.
Straight for the king.
The Persian king loses his nerve and flees the battlefield, leaving behind his wife, his mother, and his children.
And this gives us a really interesting glimpse into Alexander's character at this stage. How does he treat the captured royal family?
With incredible chivalry. He treats them as royalty. He promises them their safety, their status. It fit his narrative of being a civilized conqueror, a rightful king, not some barbarian looter. He wants to replace Darius, not just destroy him.
Mm-hmm.
He then moves down the coast, taking the naval bases to neutralize the powerful Persian fleet. He besieges Tyre and Gaza, which were these incredible feats of military engineering that proved he wasn't just a cavalry commander, but a master of siege warfare too.
But the main event, the real title fight, is the Battle of Gaugamela, October 1st, 331 BC. This is where the Persian Empire effectively ends. Let's really unpack this battle, because the sources make it sound like a tactical masterpiece.
It is arguably his greatest tactical performance ever. Darius had learned from his mistake at Assus. He knew he needed space. So he chose a wide, flat plain at Gaugamela, it's near modern-day Erbil in Iraq, specifically to let his massive numbers and his chariots work.
He even had the ground flattened, right?
And he did. He had his men level the ground to make it smoother for his scythed chariots.
Scythed chariots. So these are chariots with spinning blades on the wheels.
Yeah, designed to just mow down infantry, cut them to pieces. So Darius has the numbers estimates very wildly, but he vastly outnumbered Alexander, and he has the terrain he wants.
So what does Alexander do? If he just lines up and fights a straightforward battle, he gets flanked and crushed.
He knows that.
Yeah.
So Alexander employs this brilliant psychological and tactical gambit. He realizes that if he attacks the center directly, he'll be enveloped. So instead, he starts moving his elite companion cavalry toward the far right flank, riding almost parallel to the Persian line.
He's not even attacking them.
No, he's just riding sideways, basically, heading toward the rough ground at the very edge of the battlefield.
He's baiting them. He's saying, I'm going over here, come and get me.
Exactly. He is forcing Darius to react, to stretch his line.
Yeah.
Darius sees his best troops moving away and thinks, I can't let him get around my flank.
Mm-hmm.
So Darius sends his own cavalry to shadow Alexander, moving further and further to his left to try and stop him. And this creates a gap, a seam in the Persian line between their left wing and their center.
The famous pawn sacrifice. He draws them out, creates the weakness, and then snap.
Alexander sees the gap open. In an instant, he spins his cavalry into a giant wedge formation and charges straight into that opening, directly at Darius. At the same moment, his phalanx in the center pushes forward. It was a complete shock assault.
So for the second time, Darius looks up through the dust and sees Alexander the Great charging right at him.
And for the second time, Darius turns his chariot and runs.
He just flees again.
And when the king runs, the army crumbles. The morale collapses. The Persian Empire, the structure that had ruled the East for centuries, was effectively broken on that dusty plain. Alexander marches into Babylon, then Susa, and finally Persepolis, the ceremonial capital.
And this is where things get a little heated, literally.
Yep.
The burning of Persepolis.
It remains one of the most controversial moments of his life. Was it a drunken accident after a massive party, as some sources suggest? Maybe egged on by a famous courtesan named Thais?
Or was it a calculated political act?
Exactly. A deliberate act of vengeance for the Persian burning of Athens 150 years earlier. A message that the old order was truly over.
Whatever the reason, he looted the treasury, which was just immense, and then the great palace complex went up in flames. It signaled the definitive end of the Achaemenid dynasty.
But this is where the story shifts. Alexander has conquered the Persians, now he has to rule them. And this is where we see the transformation. This is Act 3.
He starts looking higher. We have to talk about Egypt and the Siwa Oasis.
This actually happened just before Gaugamela, in 332 BC. He went down into Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule. They crowned him pharaoh. But then he takes this strange detour, a long, very dangerous journey through the desert to the Oracle of Zeus Ammon at Siwa.
He goes in to see the oracle alone, and the priest there tells him something that changes everything for him.
The priest addresses him as son of Ammon, which is the equivalent of son of God. Now, there's some debate among historians about whether this was maybe a linguistic slip-up, a priest trying to speak Greek.
But Alexander didn't take it that way.
No. Alexander took it literally. He began to truly believe in his own divinity. This wasn't just propaganda anymore. He felt deep down that he was different from other men.
And this belief starts to bleed into how he actually runs his new empire. We see this fusion policy start to emerge. He's conquered the Persians, but now he starts acting like one.
He realized he couldn't rule this vast Asian empire purely as a Macedonian occupier, which is too big. He needed the cooperation of the Persian nobility. So he started adopting Persian dress, the diadem, the robes. He began demanding proskynesis.
Which is what, exactly?
It's a form of ritual bowing that Persians did for their superiors. It could be anything from a slight bow to full prostration on the ground.
And his rugged Macedonian veterans absolutely hated it. I mean, these are guys who grew up in the mud with him. For a Greek or a Macedonian, you only bow to the gods. To bow to a man is slavery.
It caused massive friction. There were plots against his life. The Macedonians felt he was going native, that he was forgetting who had bled and died for him. They thought he was becoming the very thing they had fought to destroy.
And this all culminates in the Susa weddings in 324 BC.
Oh yes, the Susa weddings. It was a mass marriage ceremony where Alexander essentially forced about 80 of his high-ranking officers and thousands of his soldiers to marry Persian noblewomen. Alexander himself married Statera, a daughter of Darius.
A literal marriage of East and West.
Symbolically, yes, that was the idea. A fusion of the ruling classes, practically. It was a disaster. The Macedonians resented it deeply. The sources tell us that after Alexander died, almost all of those marriages were immediately dissolved.
Really?
Yes. Only a couple of his generals kept their Persian wives. It showed that while Alexander had this grand vision of a unified, fused culture, his men just wanted to go home and be rich Macedonians.
But Alexander doesn't go home. He keeps pushing east. He pushes into what is now modern-day Afghanistan, fighting these brutal guerrilla wars in Bactria and Sogdiana. This is where he marries Roxana, a local chieftain's daughter.
Yes, another political marriage, but by all accounts a genuine love match, too. But the drive is always east. He wants to reach the ends of the earth, the great outer sea. He thinks the world ends just past India. And this brings him to the Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BC.
This is the battle against King Porus in the Punjab region. And for the Macedonians, this is like something out of a horror movie because of one specific thing. War elephants.
They had seen elephants before, but never used in battle like this. Porus had a line of war elephants that absolutely terrified the Macedonian horses and the men. I mean, imagine standing there with your long pike and a wall of gray screaming muscle is charging at you.
The horses wouldn't go near them.
No, because of the smell. It just creates chaos.
And the battle itself.
It was brutal. Muddy, bloody, fought in the middle of the monsoon rain. Alexander wins, he captures Porus, but the cost is incredibly high. Even Bucephalus, his legendary horse, dies shortly after this battle, likely from wounds or just old age. Alexander actually founded a city there and named it Bucephala in his horse's honor.
But his men, they break. They've marched thousands and thousands of miles. They've fought monsters. They've endured rain and disease. They reach the Bees River, and they just stop.
It's the mutiny at the Bees. It is the only defeat Alexander ever suffered. And it didn't come from an enemy army. It came from his own men. They refused to go any further. They basically told him, "We are tired. We are rich. We want to see our families. We are not going to fight the massive empires you've heard about further east."
And Alexander does not take this well.
No. He sulked in his tent for 3 days like Achilles, hoping they'd change their minds. They didn't. He was forced, finally, to turn back.
But the return journey wasn't some victory lap. He decides to take the army through the Gadrosian Desert. Why on earth would he do that?
That is the big question. This is the southern coast of modern Iran and Pakistan. It is a desolate, waterless hellscape. Some historians argue it was a terrible mistake, that he miscalculated the supply lines from his fleet, which was sailing alongside.
But others have a darker theory.
Others, perhaps more cynically, suggest it was punishment.
Punishment for the mutiny.
Exactly. He was furious that they made him turn back. So he decided to march them through a route that even the legendary Cyrus the Great had failed to cross, just to prove that he could do it.
And the sources call it a murderous crossing.
It was devastating. Flash floods in the dry riverbeds, dehydration, heat stroke. Men were drinking their own urine to survive. He lost more men in that desert than he did in many of his greatest battles combined. It was a tragic, bitter end to the conquest.
He finally makes it back to Babylon in 323 BC. He's planning a new invasion, this time of Arabia. He's reorganizing the army, but he never gets to launch it.
No. He's back in Babylon, the new center of his world, and he's partying hard, drinking very heavily with his admiral Nearchus and a friend Medius. And then he develops a fever. It starts with a sharp pain in his back, then paralysis slowly creeps in. He loses his voice.
And on June 10th or 11th, 323 BC, Alexander the Great dies. He's 32 years old. But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly kind of horrifying. The Smithsonian source you mentioned brings up a modern theory about his death that gave me chills.
This is the Guillain-Barré syndrome, or GBS theory. The ancient sources, like Plutarch, make a specific point of mentioning that Alexander's body didn't show any signs of decomposition for 6 days after he was pronounced dead.
Right. And the ancients took this as proof that he was a god, that his body was incorruptible.
But modern medicine has a very different potential explanation.
Which is?
A doctor, Catherine Hall, has suggested he might have suffered from GBS, which is a rare autoimmune disorder that attacks the nervous system. It causes an ascending paralysis. It starts in the feet and moves up the body.
So what does that mean for his death? How does that explain the lack of decomposition?
It's possible that Alexander wasn't actually dead when they pronounced him dead. In the ancient world, they checked for life primarily by looking for breath. If GBS had paralyzed his respiratory muscles, his breathing would have been incredibly shallow, almost imperceptible. His body temperature would have dropped as his system shut down.
So they might have thought he was gone.
But he might have been in a deep coma, completely paralyzed, unable to move a muscle or speak, but still mentally conscious.
Locked in his own body while his generals are arguing over his corpse? That is a nightmare scenario.
It is speculative, of course. We can't know for sure, but it fits the symptoms described in the accounts better than just malaria or typhoid alone. But whether it was poison, disease, or this syndrome, the master of the world was gone.
And he left no clear heir. When they asked him on his deathbed who should succeed him, he supposedly whispered, "To the strongest."
Which was basically firing the starting gun for a 40-year-long civil war. His empire collapsed almost immediately. His generals, the Diadochi, the successors, spent the next few decades fighting each other, carving up the map into new kingdoms. Ptolemy took Egypt, Seleucus took the Asian territories, Cassander took Macedonia. The political unity was gone forever.
So in a political sense, you could say he failed, the empire didn't last. But the cultural unity, that's a different story. That's stuck.
That is his true legacy. We call it the Hellenistic world. Alexander didn't just burn cities, he founded them. Over 20 cities named Alexandria. He planted Greek culture, language, architecture, and art from the Mediterranean all the way to the Indus River Valley.
And you see this in things like Greco-Buddhism, right?
Exactly. If you look at the first statues of the Buddha from the Gandhara region, that's modern Pakistan and Afghanistan, they look like the Greek god Apollo. They're wearing Greek-style robes, they have Greek hairstyles. That is a direct result of this cultural fusion. And the language, a simplified form of Greek called Koine, became the lingua franca of the trade routes.
It became the English of the ancient world.
It really did. It's the reason the New Testament was eventually written in Greek, hundreds of years later. Alexander paved the cultural roads that the Romans and later Christianity would travel on.
So if we zoom out, what's the final verdict? Genius or monster?
I think he has to be both. You can't separate the military genius who redefined cavalry warfare from the tyrant who massacred the people of Thebes and marched his own men to death in the desert. He was a man of supreme intellect and supreme, world-altering hubris. He changed the world not by building a lasting political state, but by smashing the barriers between East and West. He forced the world to become larger.
It really makes you wonder. He was only 32. If he hadn't died, what was next? Rome. Carthage.
It is one of history's greatest what-ifs. Rome was just a rising regional power in Italy at the time. Carthage was a major power in North Africa. We know Alexander had plans for Arabia and the Western Mediterranean. Had he lived another 20 years, the Roman Empire might never have existed. We could be living in a world where the center of civilization remained in Babylon for another 1,000 years.
But as with so many empires built on the charisma of just one person, it likely would have collapsed under its own weight eventually. You can't rule the entire world from the back of a horse forever.
Indeed. It's a powerful reminder that history is so often driven by the sheer force of an individual's will, for better and for worse.
Well, Alexander built his empire with a sarissa and a cavalry charge. If you want to help us build our own little empire here, an empire of knowledge, you don't need a phalanx. Just hit that subscribe button, like this, and share this deep dive with a friend who needs a little conquest in their life. It really helps us keep the lights on and the history coming. Thanks for listening.
See you in the next one.